What's going on, YouTube? We are here with the Roid Sage Q&A again, and by all means, my expectation is that in this video, you guys can answer as many questions. I always say this. I say answer. I mean ask as many questions as you like to get as much information as you possibly can. Adam will be here. I sent him the link. He's just a little late. There's no problem with that. I was actually my fault, to be honest, because I sent the link a little too late, but here he is. Let's roll the intro. We'll get going. What's going on, Adam?
Hey man, what's up?
Not too much, man. Just cruising. I got quite a few good questions this week, actually. Did you get many this week on Instagram or anything?
I'm actually checking out. I think I got a few, but yeah, all over the place. But I'm happy to start with yours whilst I pull it up.
Yeah, no worries. And of course, guys, if you're watching and catching in live and or on the replay, feel free to drop comments down below the video or in the live chat. Ask questions, and we will get to as many as we possibly can, usually all of them within this video. So by all means, use that as a resource for yourself. Okay, so the first question we got is actually one that I don't think we've ever actually gotten before, which is not based on steroids or training or actually anything. It's about meals. So make meals for volume. Macros in a calorie deficit are hard to manage. Do they still, can we have high volume meals and still lose weight essentially? So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I agree. It's based on what you choose to eat. This is kind of a, no offense, but it's like a lower level question as far as like your advancement in the fitness industry. But I guess to be fair, a lot of bodybuilders are just eating rice and chicken even when they are in prep. So it's a little bit skewed, but there is so many ways to make food way more voluminous. For example, iceberg lettuce is like fractionally a few amount of calories, and you can add a pound of it with very little calories. If you wanted to, which I don't recommend it due to oxalic acids, but spinach, you could add legitimately nearing 2 pounds of spinach without adding 100 calories to a meal. And imagine trying to consume 2 pounds of spinach, how full you'd be. So there's lots of ways to get around it. My go-to is typically just adding some form of greens, because it's a really easy way to manipulate food volume. For example, kind of the whole peas and carrots thing, that's my go-to. So if I'm in prep or trying to lose weight, basically I just change the ratio of white rice to peas and carrots. And so like, let's say I was doing 100 grams of uncooked white rice, I'd maybe do 50 grams and then add in 100 grams of peas, and the calories on net would go down, carbohydrates would go down, but the volume would actually go up, and therefore the meal wouldn't seem that much less. In fact, it might even seem like it's more and be more fulfilling, just depending on where we're at in that cut. But yeah, there's so many ways you can make high volume food and still continue to lose weight, and obviously in that drop in calories.
Yeah, and to further add to that, I think it actually is a pretty good and pretty important question, because I think satiation, the feeling of fullness, is extremely important during a diet phase, where if you've got two individuals eating 2,000 calories, right, and you have one individual who's just gone the typical chicken and rice and just has decreased his normal food and feels a shitload less satiated than some individual who's added iceberg lettuce, who added a lot of vegetables, who's increased his fiber intake, who's drinking a lot of fluid, who's been smart with his meal timing. I think one person, yes, you can brute force it and willpower will always win, but one person is more likely to be a lot more successful in their diet, and it's the person who's been intelligent about it. So, similar to what Kolton said, I think, adding like vegetables to each food, to each meal helps a lot. And also like the timing of the food. And what I mean by that is, one thing I like to do when calories are super low is what I like to call like almost protein fasting, where it's not like intermittent fasting where you don't eat, but you portion most of your carbohydrates around the workout window. So most of your carbs are going to go in pre and post workout, and then all your other meals, you're basically just having like protein and veggies, and that way you maintain workout performance, but you also keep more satiated and full. Because if you work out in the evening, there's no point of you having a bunch of your carbs in the morning and then having like poverty carbs, pre-workout, and then nothing, in the evening when you perhaps most hungriest. So also like moving your meal spacing around. You don't have to have 40, 50 even amounts of carbs with each meal. You could move them around, and then for actual meal hacks or making food more voluminous and with low calorie stuff. I mean, shit, we could sit here all day. I mean, I think Greg just said as a cookbook, you can literally go on YouTube, literally search like low volume, low calorie, high volume food. There's lots and lots of stuff, but I would be implementing that stuff to stay satiated.
Yeah, 100%. And there's a flaw with that kind of philosophy, like the Greg Doucette philosophy, which is like a lot of his foods aren't whole foods. Like he has definitely some recipes for whole foods, but a lot of it is like dessert based, ice cream, cakes, cookies, cheesecakes, that kind of stuff. Which, hey, is fine every once in a while. But what I find is that people suddenly get too fixated on sweets and then they stop eating real food. And then suddenly digestive issues crop up. They start actually, being more food focused in general towards sweet things and sort of programming and reaffirming their mind as a seeking sweetness kind of being, which I can find actually is a bad habit to develop, especially when you're in an aggressive fat loss phase. But I do think they have their place. If you're about to crack and you need something, they're a really good solution. Like instead of binging on Ben and Jerry's, you could make protein ice cream and then not feel guilty and sustain your goals. And the net decrease in fat loss is so much less than it would be if you had that 1,500 cup of Ben and Jerry's. So there's definitely ways around it, but I think that stuff can get kind of negative. And that's why I try to use mostly veggies. And there's so many ways to get creative with it, guys. And other veggies are more beneficial than different ones. For instance, like onions have a lot more higher satiation rating than does for example cucumber, which is a really good example. So you can choose foods based on what you respond best to and what keeps you the fullest, and you should eat your own fine. And that being said too, protein is really thermogenic, so you can always eat more protein and generally be fine, just as long as you're not taking that to the extreme. But if you're eating more protein, the likelihood that you're going to actually accumulate adipose tissue is quite low. But I think that's a good question. Summarization. Okay, really good one. JR Steele asks, long-time questioner, which I love these questions. What the heck is NMN as a supplement? I keep getting it advertised to me. So NMN stands for nicotinamide. Nicotinamide mononucleotide something. I can't remember the last one. Nicotinamide mononucleotide. Maybe that's just it. Nicotinamide mononucleotide.
So nicotinamide mononucleotide. That's it. That's just it. You got the full name.
Damn it, I'm so smart. Okay. That's awesome. I mean, it's probably not effective. I'll be real. Unless you're over the age of like 35, 40. Yeah, exactly. Like unless you get it intravenously done or you're over the age of 45, 40, it's probably not worth your time. Theoretically, it's at the end of the day, like downstream, its effect is essentially to upregulate mitochondrial function. And it can do that in a lot of clinical data, but again, it's sparse at best in humans, and clinical trials aren't super conclusive, as well as orally, it's just like, it's super lame. Like you might as well just go to an IV clinic and get an IV drip done for $100 or something, like once or twice a week. And even that's just so cost prohibitive, it's maybe not worth it. I think there's so many other layers of things you can do to prevent aging, which is essentially the complex that it's trying to inhibit, which through like sirtuin cells and stuff like that, that would be more cost effective. And just in general, follow the suit of your life that you're already living, and it'd just be better.
This is one of those ones where it's like, I would only recommend this in a certain circumstance. So firstly, as Kolton said, I would look at, can you afford to get it intravenously? It's like the same as NAD plus, NMM. Also another example is like the difference between like oral or carnitine injectable. We know that like if you can get injectable, go injectable. It's way more bioavailable. Same thing with these compounds. In addition to that, if you're someone who's, firstly, I would say like, are you above the age of 35? Okay, then if you are above the age of 35, are you optimizing your hormone profile already? Are you using things like growth hormone? However you optimize your diet, is it full of micronutrient dense whole food? Are you drinking enough water? Are you exercising? Are you doing all this long list of low-hanging fruit, which is going to have way better anti-aging stuff, properties? If you've done all of that, optimize it, and you still have the funds and time left over, yeah, sure, get an intravenous NAD plus or NMM drip. But it's one of those things where if you haven't done all of that first, it's like, why are you spending the money, resources, and time when you can literally do something like as silly as put SPF sunblock on to keep your skin useful? No joke. Like, hit all those boxes first before you optimize that. And hey, that could be you, but yeah, it's very few people actually fit that criteria, I find.
Yeah, I agree. It's like something as simple as getting enough hydration in a day consecutively for a week at a time is probably 90-fold more effective. And I encourage anyone who's actually interested in NMN or NR to go down the pipeline of looking at David Sinclair's research and how fraudulent it was. He's actually under a class action lawsuit for multi-billion dollars for some of the shit he did. And you have to realize that a lot of the research he fabricated, legit, like from the ground up, fabricated it completely to build a supplement, to sell it, and then sold the company for $2 billion. So there's a lot of, and so just to give you the brief clip notes, he built the study data and then he recreated it several times with the same group of people. He told these people, let's fabricate the evidence and make sure it looks really good on paper so that when we build a supplement company, it looks legitimate. And so he did that. He built a supplement company. He started publicizing data about NR and NMN, and then he actually created those products. He distributed them and then white labeled them to other companies. And then the main company that was creating all of these products got bought out by another company for about $2 billion, a little bit more. And then they tried to recreate his data several different hundreds of times, couldn't recreate a single piece of his data. Now they're putting him under class action lawsuit of several years later because of all this happening. So there's very little evidence to support that these compounds might even be useful. So just the cliff notes. All right, Aaron asks, we all know Aaron, what's the point of an 8-hour arm session if you can do a 9-hour arm session? Is there any science behind 8 hours?
Yes, more is better.
Yeah. Answer solved. Realistically, like me and Adam were talking about this, if I had a dumbbell next to my desk and I did bicep curls every 2 hours, like one set of bicep curls to near failure to failure, I think that would be advantageous if at the end of the week I accumulated like 30 total sets of bicep curls, working sets, because biceps and triceps are just so hard to fatigue realistically that the stimulus needed to grow them is recreatable so frequently. It's hard to say that that would actually be a downside, and that it's not like they're legs, right? You can't do continuous sets of legs. They're arms, and it's relatively easy to recover, relatively easy to reproduce the same amount of intensity the second set after the first set. So theoretically, yeah, more is better. I would imagine. It's not an experiment I've personally done, nor is, wait, I think you actually have done this, haven't you?
I've attempted it. I got to about like the 3-4 hour mark and I was like, fuck.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm just going to tear everything.
Yeah. So, I mean, theoretically, probably could help, I'd imagine. Okay. Also, Aaron asks, what's a plan that helped you level up quick? For me, it was adding an extra rest day, 3 in a week in my earlier years of training. So I'm assuming, and for those of you who don't know, Aaron's asking these questions out of politeness because he's like 280 pounds or something. But I didn't realize he only trained 4 days a week. I thought he was training 5 days a week.
I believe he is training. Yeah, I believe he is training 5. I can't remember his exact split, but I believe last time we spoke, he was training 5 days. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah,
go ahead.
You go.
No,
I was just going to say, I think the thing that, well, I think he asked specifically, like, what thing helped you level up? And I think for me specifically, it was like throwing away the idea that like there's a specific amount of work that I need to do, or that I'm like, going to be under recovered or something like that. And basically basing off my total work that I'm doing in terms of working set based on my recovery. What I mean by that is, we've all heard the concepts of MRV or MEV, but let's simplify it a little bit more and say, if you're trying to bring up a body part, let's say arms, right? The way I would approach it is I would basically keep adding intensity and or sets, and I was pushing closer to mechanical failure and adding sets and or frequency until the point where I'm finding that I'm not recovering between workouts and like I'm literally regressing in my lifts. That tells me, hey, I've probably hit my stimulus threshold, recovery threshold, whatever you want to call it, and probably can't work more than this without increasing food, increasing, the dose of PEDs, or, increasing my recovery modalities to fit in more work capacity. And that way I know I'm probably training the quote unquote optimal amount and then resting the optimal amount, and basically basing off how much stimulus I get in terms of like working sets, volume, whatever, based on how I'm recovering. And that worked really well for me because I was looking at a lot of the research early on in my early years, like, okay, 12, about 10 sets for a large muscle group, a minimum effective volume. Most people can't do more than 20 working sets for a smaller muscle group like biceps or something. And I sort of did stick within these time frames. But I thought to myself after a while, well, everyone is quite individual. There's going to be so many factors that affect your recovery. The type of PEDs on you, the amount of PEDs on, what phase that you're in your diet on, what's your nutrition looking like, what's your sleep looking like, what other recovery are you doing outside the gym. So when you factor all this in, that number becomes quite arbitrary. And I personally believe you should base it on like literally how you're feeling and how your performance is going in the gym. Once I started doing that, sometimes when I was trying to bring up my arms, I was doing 25, 26, 27, sometimes 30 sets of like stand outs to the point where, I was, performance was regressing, then I pulled back. And I think that's the takeaway from that is just push yourself until the point where you're legitimately over recovering objectively on your workouts. And then, hey, that's when you're training enough.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. It's very hard. I would rather do too much than too little is, I guess, the way I'd put it. And once you find too much, then it's easy to pull back a little bit. But if you never push to too much, it's very hard to tell. It's like trying to explain to someone what reps in reserve is without them having ever actually trained to failure. It's near impossible to explain what that would feel like for them. And so in order for them to have experienced that, it's worth doing a couple sets to failure. I agree with that. I think for me, honestly, it was like for my first couple of shows in the NPC, I was literally doing like 300 milligrams of gear. And I thought that was like extreme, and I thought that was like 5 milligrams of Anavar a day and like 100 milligrams of Masteron a week. And like, for me, I was like, dude, this is a lot, like kind of scary. It was actually the point where I realized you can run a lot of gear safely. It's just having those sort of firewalls in place where you're checking your health, monitoring the variability of your health and tracking trends that you find that, hey, if you're smart and you have a good diet and your training is efficacious, you stay hydrated and you're actually taking your preventative maintenance as far as health goes quite seriously, you can run a lot of gear without any issues. And that's kind of where I started to make real progress, was after the last show I did, where I got up to like 260, 265 pounds. I was talking to Aaron about this last night. Actually, we were playing video games. And I was like, yeah, man, I wish I just would have kept going. Like, if before I came to Thailand, before I had like kind of gotten burnt out from it all, like if I would have just kept going, I would have been insane. But the point is I think that's really where I started to realize, okay, if you can monitor things appropriately and take care of yourself, you can run a decent amount of gear and be safe. It's just having that, the lower emotional threshold to the decisions that you're making, doing it without emotion involved. And like, I need to take more. I feel like I need to take more, instead of like, do I logistically need to take more? Is that actually what is the step forward? So, yeah. Okay. So that was a good question, but I have an even better one. So this is a really important question for me. Thoughts on seed oils. So I will say this, and I think it's an important question because it is so dichotomous on the internet. There's a lot of information that gets misconstrued on both sides. People who are saying seed oils have no potential harmful effect on health, and people who say that they do have harmful effects on health. They're both sides are so contentious, and both sides have a lot of flaws in the data that they point out. But if I'm to just conclusively look at chemistry and understand biochemistry, we know that seed oils mostly consist of linoleic acid, and it oxidizes wildly easily. Like, this shit is super, super easy to oxidize, which when you create reactive oxygen species, you have a lot of genomic stress factors, and that isn't good over a long period of time. It can cause inflammation, joint pain, etc. Linoleic acid isn't also just something that's like transiently in your body. Its half-life is over 2 years long. Like it's over 680 days in humans. So it's something that when you ingest a lot of it, it will be there for a long time. And theoretically, if you're someone that has chronic joint pain, chronic achiness, chronic fatigue, there's a possibility that the level of reactive oxygen species in serum is just so high that you're causing this abundance of stress on yourself as a system. And I'm not to say like it's completely bad, right? Like I think it's kind of like fructose, where people say fructose is the cause of, fatty liver disease, which it's absolutely not. It's just an abundance of fructose is the cause of fatty liver disease. 1 in 3 people in America have fatty liver disease, and it's not because they're eating fucking mangoes. It's because they're drinking, Coke and Mountain Dew, and they're having high fructose corn syrup in nearly everything they eat. And I think the same is true here. It's not necessarily the seed oils that are applicably causing the issue. It's maybe the abundance of seed oils that are causing the issue. So it is true to say that Paleolithic humans had generally about, a ratio of about 1 to 4 omega-3 to omega-6 fatty acids. So they had 1 ratio of omega-3 fatty acids per every 4 of omega-6. And now it's closer to 1 to 20 to even 1 in 30 in some Americans. So that has skewed drastically, but I don't think it's the seed oils which are at fault. I just think it's like saying a glass of wine is healthy a day, which it's not, but then taking that and extrapolating that if I drink 18 glasses of wine a day, it's still healthy. No, they're 2 different things entirely. So I hope that kind of answers the question. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, to give a less scientific answer, which you touched on the end, I think it's so true about the poison is in the dosage. And what I mean by that is, like, if you're cooking with enough seed oil that it's detrimenting your health, how much goddamn oil are you using? So that's my point. Like, if you're someone who's like dabbing the pan with a little bit of seed oils, but eating a macronutrient dense whole food diet, exercising, doing some cardio, I don't think it's going to affect your health. But if you're fat as fuck and frying everything in seed oils, yeah, it's probably going to have a detrimental effect. So it's one of those ones where it's like the analogy again, drinking the can of Coke. You're not going to get fucking obese from drinking a can of Coke, even once a day, as part of your whole, your whole diet and exercise regime. But if you're not doing any activity and drinking like gallons of it, yeah, of course you're going to run into issues. And I think it's the same analogy here.
Yeah, I agree. It's just an abundance is what kills. The poison is a saying that we've all heard. The poison is within the dose, and it's just, or the dose is with the poison is within the dose. Yeah, and it's just understanding that abundance of anything is too bad. Period. I don't think if I had a choice on how I personally made my nutritional decisions based on what I've done as far as research and the exponential amount of evidence we have in nature right now, I would say that I've tried to reduce seed oils / vegetable oils more often than not. And I try to base most of my fat intake from just the foods I'm eating, eggs, meats in general. And it doesn't have to be red meat. I'm not a carnivore, but like salmon and, healthy mackerel and things like that, like really great sources of fat. That's where I get it from. I don't try to add olive oil or a vegetable oil or any of those things to my diet. And that's just my personal belief. But yeah, we have another good question from JR Steele, and this is actually one that I think is underutilized in some contexts. But are topical yohimbine creams / gels like Vasoburn worth getting?
Well, see, I'll be honest, I haven't experienced with them. From what I've seen, I think the effect is quite minimal. But if you've used them specifically, you can speak on your experience there. But it's one of those ones where it's like the last thing I'll be pulling out of the toolbox, if at all.
Yeah, I think what the mechanism behind it is probably what people get confused with. Realistically, what it's doing is increasing blood flow to a specific area. Like you're putting an irritant on your body and it's causing, irrational irritation, and that causes localized blood flow to coagulate to a certain area. And then that would then theoretically carry, fatty acids out of that area once they've been, once you've already started lipolysis happening. I don't think it's actually worth it. Todd actually created a product with topical yohimbine, and I believe, don't quote me on this, but clenbuterol in it, and he swears by it. I've never actually tried it religiously, so I can't say how effective it might actually be. I did try it for a little bit, but again, it's so hard when you have so many variables in play. You have gear, you have growth hormone, clenbuterol, all these other lipolytics.
Oral yohimbine,
yeah, exactly. Oral yohimbine's already in play. You already are doing 50 minutes of cardio a day. You're already in a calorie deficit. Like, what's actually working? And no one knows. So I would say you're probably better off and there's actually some good evidence to support localized injections of yohimbine could be effective. But again, we're not talking like it's just going to nuke the fat in that specific area. It's just going to help liberate the fat in that specific area, and then you would have to then burn it. And that's kind of I think more than anything, that's what people struggle with, as opposed to actually liberating fat. It's just actually burning it and making sure it's out of your body. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts. That's my thoughts. You have any more questions on your side before we get to the YouTube comments?
Yes, I did have a question where someone was speaking about what would be if you had to use an oral in the off season. So they realized that the answer was going to be no. If you had to use an oral in the off season, what would you be using and how?
I actually just made a video on this on YouTube. I would use Anadrol, but I would use it very infrequently. Instead of daily, it would be maybe twice a week, maybe 3 times a week. And I would only use it on days that I am severely lacking recoverability, or I just have a completely diminished muscle. Like there's just one muscle, for example, my arms, that need to come up drastically. That either Anadrol, which also, to be honest, could be replaced with Anavar, is what I think could do it for you and where it would be realistically applicable. But outside of that, I don't know if it's going to be super beneficial in any context.
Yeah. My usual answer is like a sublingual Anavar. But to be honest, if I cast my mind back, I have had some positive experiences with sublingual turinabol, which I found pretty similar, at least in effect, in terms of, well, I found it basically the way I would describe it, and this is completely anecdotal, so take it with a bucket of salt. I found it was basically very performance-based in the sense that I had more endurance and definitely a lot more strength in the gym. I didn't see any like cosmetic effects, at least from what I thought when I was taking it. But I found it did have a really great performance enhancing effect. And I found like in a deficit, using it sublingual was like quite beneficial. And then sometimes in a surplus too, when correct, at like a specific leg day or really hard workout to get, taking like 10 milligrams sublingually, like an hour pre-workout, seemed to have quite a positive effect. And being, administering it sublingually, we know it's not going to affect liver enzymes as harshly. It's not going to affect the gastrointestinal tract as harshly. So you can sort of get away with it. But obviously monitor blood pressure, check kidney and liver function, and don't run for too long.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think orals are just, the problem is again the poisons within the dose. A lot of people just, like no one needs to be taking in excess of 50 milligrams of Anavar a day. Like you're just,
yes,
there's no extra benefit. And likewise with Anadrol, like Anadrol 50 is perfect. Like you don't need to do 100 or 150 or even 200, which is very common. It's just like at that point, just inject more gear. Like you're not getting anything extra out of it.
And also think just consuming it orally fucked most people up. Like I know myself, like if I just swallow the tablet, my digestion will be wrecked. I'll have no appetite. It happens to me every single time, as low as dose of 10 milligrams. I'm like, if you are using orals, just do them sublingually. Dissolve them under the tongue, in the mouth, the capillaries and mucus there. Don't swallow them.
Yeah. Any oral I have ever used from the early days of my bodybuilding career, which is D-ball, RIP, to Anadrol, to Anavar, to halotestin, which was only like for 4 days, but hey, I took it. All these things caused massive acid reflux. Like I never, ever, I can eat copious amounts of food. Like I can eat a buffet all day long and not have any acid reflux. But one tablet gives me a huge acid reflux, which I just don't think is, in an off season when you need to eat, and even in a prep when you need to eat, it's just not good. You're just not causing any sort of exogenous benefit. So, Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. With the normalization of PEDs in social media and arguably more and more people using, can we potentially see sports standards be altered with more people being on stuff and from a younger age? Well, yeah, there's actually a wonderful guy I meant to have on a podcast recently with myself and just have to make a whole video about it. His name's, I believe, Aaron, and he's creating the Enhanced Olympics is literally what it's called. And essentially it's all the Olympic events, but with gear involved. There's no testing or regulation. You can take whatever you want. And that should be coming up within the next couple of years. And I'm extremely excited for that. I have to take a pee, but you can take it off with that. So I'll be right back. I'm also, yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. No, I was going to say, yeah. So this question, it's got two parts. Do we see sports standards being altered with more people being on stuff and from a younger age? So when it comes to sports standards, I think at least for the foreseeable future, I don't believe they'll be altered simply because you got to remember, right? Even though we live in our little bodybuilding bubble, even though it's quite prevalent on social media, we're still a very, very small part of the population. And if you go down the streets and you ask just random people, interview them about PEDs or steroids, I would like to take an educated guess and say the vast majority of people would still be against it, or they'd be like, it's terrible, you're going to die, etc. It's cheating, so on and so forth. Even though, majority of professional sportsmen are using some form of PEDs, that would probably still be your answer. So I doubt sports standards will change for the time being. Now, would become more normalized would be, sort of like the Olympia, where I think the Olympia supposedly says that, PEDs are not allowed, but obviously that's very far from the truth or what the reality is. And it could simply be like that in sport, where I think it is like, people in the NFL, NBA, like, yeah, they're definitely taking PEDs, and testing might just fade away and become less prevalent. Kolton, quick summary of what I said. I was basically saying I don't think sports standards will change, because the vast majority of people will be like, steroids bad, and they'll stay like that for a long time. But what might happen is it might become like the Olympia, where it's like, I'm pretty sure the Olympia says there's no drugs allowed, no doping. Obviously, that's not the case. So it might become like that, where like NFL, NBA, they just silently don't test as much, and then people just take whatever the fuck they want, even though they're anti-doping and no drugs allowed, but there's no rigorous testing, basically.
Right. That's kind of where I'd see it going. Like, there's no way, thanks to Joe Biden and his friends, that doping is going to be, in American sports at least, it's going to be allowed, or at least not done without a taboo attached to it. So you're likely just going to have less testing, because reality is like, there's no way a quarterback has, in the past 20 years, gone upwards of 100 pounds, yet shortened his quarter mile time by seconds, like not just milliseconds, actual fucking seconds. Like a 330-pound athlete can't run a quarter mile in 4 seconds, but they do it every single time there's a tryout. They do it. That's not natural. Like, I don't care what anybody says. Like, you can't run that fast at 330 fucking pounds without some form of aid in that capacity. So, yeah, I think there's probably a lot of underground stuff going on, and there's very easy ways to get around testing, I'm sure.
Yeah, and to further that point, it's like, I think it was a breakdown of like Tom Brady's training. It wasn't like super. It actually wasn't even the greatest training. I'm not trying to shit on Tom Brady here, but I'm saying, like, I think they did a breakdown of his training, at least from a hypertrophy perspective, and it wasn't that good. So, like, if we're not having these crazy advancements in training, what else do you think is moving the needle so far forward? And then my other point is, like, we talk about Western countries here. Do you think China, Russia, a lot of these, North Korea, a lot of these guys who compete and win Olympic gold medals in the Olympic, do you think like USADA and shit is going into North Korea and testing? And if they are going to North Korea and China and Russia, they're having to get visas. The visa, they're getting notified. Do you really think the athletes are not being like notified well in advance of that? So it's like, we know it's there. It's more so in Western countries. Will the mindset change? Potentially, but like, with marijuana, it'll probably take a very long time.
Yeah, I agree. It's going to take way too long. Way too long. Okay, Nick P asks a different question. I noticed more and more athletes and bodybuilders not using much, if any, stimulants pre-workout. Is this because they have already an ample amount of energy, or not wanting to overstimulate their heart? Really good question.
The heart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, I think it's really conclusive now as a general concern for bodybuilders and any athlete is like heart problems. Even soccer players, you know, in the past 3 years, which obviously there's one big variable there, but in the past 3 years, they've had heart attacks like on court or, you know, in training. And it's just like, how? Like these guys are 150 pounds and highly cardiometabolically efficient. Like, how is this even happening? The reality is like stimulants manually manipulate your heart rate and heart architecture, and you have to be careful, especially when I think it's really important to understand how adrenaline works in the body and what it does to the endothelial walls. Like it causes constriction. And if you're trying to be an athlete who is focused on blood flow to optimize function, so really any athlete, it's not super ideal to have a great deal of constriction within your body. Unless you're or a strength-based athlete, which your 1 rep max is the only thing that matters. In that case, those dudes are abusing a copious amount of stimulants. But for most people who are not focused on a 1 rep max or something of that nature, it's probably just not advantageous long term, nor is it a good feeling. I don't know if, like, I personally don't enjoy being overstimulated. I don't enjoy that like rush that's almost too excessive to where you can't slow it down. You know, it's not a fun feeling personally.
Yeah, and I'll give you a real life example, like myself, and you know, a lot of the other coaches and bodybuilders here are like 250 pounds plus. You had your pre-workout meal, you've had a bunch of sodium, had a bunch of water, you've taken your you know, pre-workout Humalog, you've taken like some sublingual Anadrol, you're on like over a gram of gear, you've taken some what's it called, you've taken some growth hormone, you're trying to monitor your blood pressure. Do you think after like all of that, if you can't train after all of that, you've had a good night's sleep, if you can't train to your max capacity or all of that, then there's something wrong with the program, and also or something wrong with, I guess, the way you're approaching things. If you add a stimulant on top of all of that, one, I don't think it's going to have such a huge impact on performance. It's probably going to have you have to weigh up the performance increase versus what it's going to do to your blood pressure and heart. And that's why I believe, at least for myself and most, guys who are significantly heavy or, using a fair amount of stuff, it's just not worth the trade-off. Yeah, 100 milligrams of caffeine pre-workout, sure, enough to just get you going if you're a bit tired or you haven't slept the best. But I think, the days of taking 300, 400 plus milligrams of caffeine and giving yourself heart palpitations mid-session is kind of dumb. And I'm glad that people are no longer doing that.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I mean, as much as I love him, Rich, our boy, he did 2 scoops of pre-workout every time he trained, not 2 scoops of like,
more. I remember there was one who was in a jug. He was like, put like 8 scoops. He's like, what's this? 2,000 milligrams of caffeine.
Like, don't do that. It was in a gallon. I do remember that one. It was in a gallon jug, and he's like, don't just eat. All you guys got to use is 1. I'm like, dude, yeah. I'm glad people aren't doing that anymore. David Brown, on taking larger amounts of gear, what would you watch for when running higher doses to stay in the safe zone? Well, for me, it's pretty clear. It's just a basic metabolic panel, just see where your liver enzymes are. I would like to get a GGT on that as well, just to see if there's any transients within that. A C-reactive protein, a high sensitivity C-reactive protein would be really, really, really good, just to see if you are localizing any inflammation. Well, not even systemically increasing inflammation in your body. I think a urinalysis is a critical component of what we're doing. And really beyond that, you want to check your lipoproteins, like lipoprotein B, lipoprotein A, and then outside that, blood pressure. I think really that's the things you need to be main concerned about: your cardiovascular system, your endothelial system, your kidneys, and you're pretty much good.
Yeah, I think you touched on that. So that's from the blood work side of things. But one thing which is like so underrated and just never gets done is just take your fucking blood pressure. Frequently taking your blood pressure, I would argue, is probably the biggest indicator, because lipids and things like that, yeah, but it takes time to accumulate. You can get blood work, you can change things with diet supplementation and things like ezetimibe and other pharmacology, but like blood pressure is something that can acutely affect you, where if like you suddenly have your blood pressure like some crazy number like 190 over 90 or some shit like that, you're in a deep shit. And that's something which doesn't get addressed. Where I've had conversations with many guys in the gym, and it's like, oh, I don't feel so good. Like, yeah, I get lightheaded and shit like that. And I was like, what their blood pressure is. And they come back like 2 days later. Oh, yeah, I walk around at like 165/85. And I'm like, fuck.
Yeah.
That's something that you need to address ASAP. So secondary to that, I would be fasting glucose. It's not going to kill you, but it's one where I think that's a good indicator of like, where your metabolic rate's at, like where your insulin sensitivity is at, how you're going with your nutrition. I think that's a secondary one, but blood pressure, I think is the one that you should be paying most attention to.
Arguably, the blood pressure is probably what kills the most people in bodybuilding.
Yes.
That and
outside of midwork.
Yeah. Okay, Nick P asked, thoughts on using cereal juices around workouts? With cereal being processed and juices being all sugar, is it potentially more harm long-term than short-term gain? I don't think so, man. At the end of the day, and I know we just got done talking about like high fructose corn syrup and shit like that, but here's the thing: like when I recommend juices, I'm not recommending fucking apple juice. Like I'm suggesting real juices like pomegranate juice or beet juice, which is absolutely gnarly tasting, but if you can stomach it, which I did for a long time, it's a great source of nitrates and glucose pre-workout.
Beetroot extract,
fructose, yeah. But I do think it maybe not if your diet is shit elsewhere, it's probably not the best idea. But cereals and juices, especially around the workout, it's kind of where you can get away with it because, quite frankly, like an average human in an hour workout burns somewhere around 250 to 300 grams of glycogen. So theoretically, if you were just restoring what you burnt, it's just you're going to use it right away, essentially. And as long as you're not eating like Fruity Loops, you're eating rice-based cereal, you're eating corn-based cereal, like you're going to be fine. The problem is when people extend that to, well, I'm going to have Cocoa Puffs instead of whatever, like Rice Krispies. And it's like, okay, that's taking things a little bit to the extreme, or Cookie Crisp or something like that. But for the most part, I think it's fine as long as you just play your cards right.
Yeah, I agree. Like one, there's a wide constituents of like what's fruit juice. Like I think freshly squeezed fruit juice from actual fruit with not much preservatives added, fructose syrup or high fructose corn syrup or shit like that. If it's basically like just quote unquote natural fruit juice, you're fine. In fact, I'm a big advocate of non-acidic fruit juices during surplus phases, and also things like Kolton touched on, like beetroot extract, which increases nitric oxide blood flow, give you crazy pumps pre-workout. I use like 10 grams of beetroot extract in my pre-workout drink. Works great. Things like that work very well. Same thing with cereals. Like there's a whole variety of cereals. Like you can get rice-based cereals like Rice Puffs or Rice Krispies or whatever, which again basically are just puffed up rice, which work really, really well. And then my argument too would be, if you're eating 5,000 calories, let's say, majority of that is like whole food with fruits and vegetables. One bowl of Cocoa Puffs pre-workout is not going to do shit. So again, the doses and the quantity, so to speak, too. So you're fine. Just don't have every meal as fucking cereal and fruit juice, and you'll be good.
Yeah, I think you're fine. And it's just really important on the juices. It's like what we're talking about is like orange, like freshly squeezed orange juice, which you can get from any store. It's very simple to buy. You just have to be. It's not like your orange juice that's in like little boxes that you put a straw on and sip out of. Like that's for kids. It has lots of sugar, fructose corn syrup and shit. It shouldn't be for kids, but it is. We're talking about like the orange juice with like some little pulp in it. Like it's real. You can have a glass of that before your workout. It's great. Usually about a cup of any fruit juice is roughly 25 grams of carbs. It's highly nutritious. It's filled with antioxidants. A lot of the times there's polyphenols and propanols that have really good benefits, right? Like nitric oxide and beets and various other compounds in pomegranate juice that act as antiviral agents. Like there's a lot of good stuff that can be said about that. So it's just, again, within moderation and you'll be fine. Generally too, by the way, they also increase digestibility of proteins because they have enzymes like bromelase in them and other things too. So it can actually help aid digestion of a meal if you drink it beforehand. Is it better to take higher doses of HGH? No, it's not. Next question.
Yeah, sorry, dude. You got to dose it daily. Yeah. Think about it too. It's like the same thing with like your testosterone. You're going to have more stable levels. You're going to have more, what's the expression used? Area under the graph, so to speak. More exposure basically to a higher peak concentration. So yeah, I mean, I know Steve did do a video on like poor man's HGH protocol, which I think included like growth hormone secretagogues. Don't quote me on that. You can look at that if you're trying to reduce the cost. But I personally just think it will be simpler and probably more cost effective. Just take a lower dose more frequently. So like 2 IU, in the evening.
Just ask yourself this: does your body produce? Let's just say you're taking 4 IUs a day. Does your body produce 4 IUs a day? No. So if you stop taking it, is your body going to produce an equivocal amount of growth hormone? No. So it's like, if you want to be a bodybuilder every day of the week, you would want to take the thing that's making you a bodybuilder every day of the week. Or like, for example, I had a guy ask me, like, why would I microdose trenbolone every day? Well, are you producing it every day? No. Okay. And is its half-life going to sustain itself through you every day? No. Okay. Well, looks like we're taking it every day. It's like, it's a very simple question. And there is actual downregulation of your growth hormone axis when you take exogenous growth hormone. Now, it's very transient and temporary when it is suppressed, but a day is about that perfect time frame where it is suppressed. So let's say you do 5 days on, 2 days off for probably about a good 36 hours after the first or last, or I should say probably closer to 40-ish hours after the last injection. You're not going to be able to produce your own growth hormone effectively. So now you're in a debt of growth hormone, where on average you could have just had a higher serum growth hormone level, or as Adam said, a greater area under curve of exposure to something that's going to make you grow and sustain a higher serum level of IGF-1. So simple set. All right. Your thoughts on DMAA and how much would you use for pre-workout? I have so little experience here, honestly. I've never actually bothered taking it myself. So I don't have you.
Yeah, I've had a few pre-workouts basically back then in South Africa where it was like the Wild West and they put whatever the fuck they wanted. Yeah, it does have a crazy stimulatory effect, but it's again one of those ones where we really want that much of stimulus pre-workout, Joe. Like I remember the original Jack 3D with 1,3-diethylamine. There was one also in South Africa called Muscle Marinade where they basically got 1,3-diethylamine, DMAA, a shitload of caffeine, and 1 or 2 other amphetamines. Legitimately put it all in one pre-workout and sold it. I remember the crash was so hectic that I actually fell asleep afterwards. After gym, I remember being at the dining room table and I fell asleep, and it was very, very strange experience. And again, it's one of those ones where it's like, do we really need that much more stimulus? Probably not. So again, if you want a little bit of DMA in your pre-workout, go for it. But again, I'm on the side of stimulus. Pay more attention to your nutrition and your pharmacology, and you'll probably have a better time.
Yeah. What would you say for a dose if you had to say one?
Dose, if I remember correctly, it was like very, very small amounts. I believe, don't quote me on this, but I think it was like a gram. I could get it wrong. I go look up the dosing because mostly were like proprietary blends where they put in the DMA. I never dosed it separately myself. I want to say a gram. That could be completely off, but most of them were proprietary blends with DMA in it.
Yeah, I think it might be lower, and that was the proprietary blend. I would say, I'm just looking at some of the stuff that's on or was on the market, and it looks like the average was around 20 to 100 milligrams.
That was probably the total proprietary blend of stimulants, to be honest. So it was an amount within that.
Yeah, it says on the Jack 3D it has 25 milligrams per serving. So I would say probably if you could do like a microdose of 10 milligrams, if you had to, that should be fine. But I think beyond that, it's probably not necessary, especially if you're already taking clenbuterol and Himbine and already multiple things that are driving stress to the adrenergic system and really limiting rest and digest states. Stim's not needed for anyone in their 20s. I kind of agree with this. I think a lot of what you can do can be done with a coffee. Just fine. Hypothetically, Kyle Nowakowski. Hypothetically, if you were on a test base of 350 milligrams, 50 milligrams per day, what would you add in only using research chemical webs? Damn it, it was a good question until this came across. Sites such as Amino Asylum. Let's take a yonder. And by the way, YouTube, I know you're probably watching this video because you love to watch my videos, but I am not advocating Amino Asylum at all. Okay, you'll see there's no description link that has any sort of that product promotion in my bio. It is solely just
Well,
for the video that we're
yeah.
using.
Look, we'll stick to the question, but obviously my first question will be like, if you can get testosterone, why can't you get other anabolics? But okay, let's stick to the question. I mean, off the top of my head, without even going through a website, probably a growth hormone secretagogue if they got no actual growth hormone on there, would probably be what I'll be looking at. Outside of growth hormone secretagogue, I mean, if you're a cutting phase, the clenbuterol, your himbine, that would be useful. If you're in a surplus phase, oh shit, Bedrol, DMZ, that Psalms there too. Okay. I mean, fuck, I probably wouldn't try any sort of Psalms, if I'm being honest. I would probably just stick to the test and the growth hormone secretagogues.
Yeah, I would just increase the test for the most part. I don't see and it depends on what phase you're in, right? Like fat loss, muscle gain.
Yes.
What have
Let's
you.
assume let's assume a muscle gaining phase. I would use a growth hormone secretagogue, increase the test, use the Romasin or Amino Asylum to deal with, the aromatization from the testosterone. And again, I guess they have a lot of crazy pre-workouts like that mass. What's that in that Mass Monster blend? Could you go Mass Monster? What's it?
Mass Monster.
Mass Monster blend.
It has L-arginine, L-citrulline, L-ornithine, L-glutamine, L-glycine, L-lysine, BCAs,
way more tame than what I expected.
No, it's basically just an amino acid shot.
I was thinking like Anadrol and like ATP.
Yeah. I mean, I would say probably if you have a weak body part, I would maybe localize like bilaterally injections of IGF-1 LR3. But beyond that, I think maybe, I think growth hormone secretagogues could be useful here, or anything that actually supports really good sleep. They have a couple of sleep products which I think are good. Or I don't know how real it is, but tadalafil could be useful. I would say, if I had to build a cycle with a test base and then the stuff on this website, I would say you're going to use the testosterone like 3 times weekly, depending on what weak muscle groups you'd have. I would use bilateral injections of IGF-1 LR3. I would then dose a choice, whatever you want to choose. They're all kind of the same. But obviously MK677 is the one we probably know most about. I would choose one of those secretagogues to administrate nightly, and then I would probably add metformin to that from this list as well. I think that's really all you need to worry about. Everything else on here is kind of just like maybe not worth your time.
Yeah, I agree. I think the side effects you get from running some of the research chemicals, they are probably not worth it, and just increasing the testosterone dose is going to be your best bet by far.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's what I would do. I sincerely suggest that probably over anything else. If I had to do that, which in that first place, I probably wouldn't do that. I would just increase test, but okay, whatever. Okay, fat cells. Fat question. Are fat cells actually burned up for energy and destroyed, or are they only reduced in size and volume? So once fat, always fat. Yes, this is actually accurate. This is kind of a complicated question to explain in chemistry terms, but when you lose fat, you're not actually losing the fat cell. You're just draining the triglycerides out of a fat cell, and then they go into your blood. They actually break the backbone, the glycerol backbone, and then the glycerol stays in that fat cell and it holds water. It's an osmotic molecule. So that fat cell, even if it has no fat in it, will actually remain inflamed for a while. This is why people can get fat and flat at the same time, is because usually of water retention due to excess fat loss quickly. But that fat cell just shrinks. There is chemistry that can nuke fat cells, but it's very skeptical at best with most things that we talk about here. And I don't think it would maybe be worth your time. Most of what we're going to use for fat burning is just going to create a better transit from fat in the cell to fat out of the cell. And the cell will always stay there. And this is why it's so important, and Adam will 100% agree with this, when you are bulking, to not push food so high that you actually get fat, because de novo lipogenesis, or the production of new fat, is relatively easy to do, especially post-show. like right post show, it is very easy to create new fat cells, but fat cells once created are almost impossible to get away unless you are really manipulating pharmacology.
Yes. So basically what Kolton said, I completely agree. It's, to summarize it, basically like when you are in the process of lipolysis or weight loss in a calorie deficit, you're not quote unquote burning fat. What you're basically doing is liberating triglycerides and glycerol, which is used as energy, which basically are leaving the fat cell, which are still remain within your body and shrink in size. Triglycerides and the glycerol, which is being used as energy, is what basically gets oxidized or dissipates and used by the body. And that's how we have the reduction in weight. But those fat cells are there, which is correct, as Kolton said, is why basically staying leaner is always going to be more beneficial for you in terms of your progress, your health, your physique, and so forth.
Yeah, right. Right. I hope that helps, Jay. I'm on T4 too, so there's that too. Yeah, I mean T4 is actually a growth promotion. Hashimoto's can be fixed naturally, though. You don't need to take T4. You can. It's really just an autoimmune disease. So if you figure out that what is triggering your immune system, whether it's food or environmental stuff, mold, pollution, whatever in your environment, you can pretty easily fix that. But if you don't want to
keep the T4 prescription, that's useful.
Yeah, keep that shit forever, dude. All right, well, that appears to be all our questions for today. That was a pretty good one. Last live I did with Paul, actually, someone was upset and said that these need to be over an hour long. Is like, we'll come and ask questions then.
Yeah, if you guys got additional questions, shoot them off. We're happy to answer them as long as the questions keep rolling, and we're happy to answer them.
Yeah, I think next week, I think what's working really well is publicizing this stuff way beforehand on the Q&As on Instagram and stuff. It seems like we get way more attraction in that capacity and are able to keep up the consistency. But beyond that, I'm also going to go get shirts today, by the way. So I'm going to go check that stuff out, see what that looks like. And
we do apologize, guys. I think we are decent coaches, if I may say so myself, but probably shit marketers.
Yeah.
So marketing our shit, putting it up on Instagram, all that stuff, probably not the best at, but it's one of those ones where like hit us up anytime, during the live stream, before, after, send us a message, you know where to find us. We're more than happy to help.
Yeah, I agree. And if that being said, if you guys do need a coach, let's throw in a little plug here. There's a link down in the description of this video that will bring you to a page where you can directly book a call with myself. It's about a 10-15 minute call just to see if you're a good fit for what we do have to offer. Not everyone is, and that's fair enough. But it's a good test to see that if you are, we can help you. That's for certain. Like 12 weeks or less, you will get life-changing results. You won't necessarily get to your goal if your goal is to be, Nick Walker in 12 weeks, but you can get life-changing results in 12 weeks. So hit that link, book a call, chat with us, join our team, which many people have, and they love the community. You might too. And if you don't, that's fine. We'll give you your money back. But outside of that, I think we're good for the day.
Yeah, pretty much covers everything. Thank you, guys. We appreciate the questions.
Yeah, thank you, guys. Mitch, have a good night as well. David, have a beautiful night. I appreciate you. All right, everybody. We will see you later.